Hello, my name is Evan DeMarsh. I'm here with Scott Horton, the director of the Scott Horton Academy of Foreign Policy and Freedom. He's also the editorial director at antiwar.com. You can follow him on X. That's at Scott Horton Show. We'll have a link below so you can check him out there. Scott, thank you for joining the Trends Journal.
Thank you. Good to be with you again.
I wanted to get right into what's going on in Iran, Scott. Right now, the most updated story that I saw was in the New York Times. And it said that Netanyahu and Arab countries in the Gulf talked Trump out of striking Iran. That's what the New York Times was reporting up to the minute. Mm-hmm. What do you see happening? Why do you think that the claim was that they'd be concerned about any kind of response Iran would take to a U.S. attack? What's your take on that report? Is that something that you see as legitimate and possible?
Well, yeah, it's been pretty widely reported about the Gulf states advising against it. I would think Netanyahu's behind the whole thing in the first place, although I guess it's within the realm of possibility that someone in his own national security establishment said, we really are not ready to take on an incoming barrage of missiles like that. Although you'd have thought that they would have figured that out beforehand, and based their policy on the reality there. I think there were some reports that was a concern by the American military as well, that they were low on THAADs and all of this stuff. And so that very well may have been their concern. And then, the Gulf states, of course, they just want stability. They don't see the profit in having a full-scale regime change in Iran. And then, all of the potential side effects of that, what's notable about those stories, with or without Israel, right, is the American people had less to do with it than foreign powers. Although, there was a Washington Post story that said that actually Trump is very concerned about his base and their opposition to the war and what it would mean for him if he did it. So that's very important, that the anti-war right keep the pressure up and make themselves heard. There are a few prominent pundits who want to climb on board for, whatever horrible policy their president happens to support. But, Thomas Massey tweeted out a poll this morning that showed 70% of the population of the country is against attacking Iran, and that includes a majority of Republicans. So regardless of the hype, they're sticking with, no, we voted for this guy because he promised no new wars. That's what we wanted. And so, the people don't have the power, or at least, on the margin we do, but just on the margin. But more and more, the people are getting it right. And the people own the narrative out here in the country about whether we should be doing this stuff, whether we can afford it, whether it's likely to work out for our interests, whether the Israelis are, conniving us into it, or whether this has anything to do with protecting national interests. It's sort of like, people, believed in W. Bush and the Iraq War right up until they didn't anymore. They believed in, especially on the left side, but people believed in the masks and all the COVID stuff right up until Ukraine. And then they just dropped it, right? Like that Kurt Metzger joke that the invasion of Ukraine is terrible, terrible, but at least it cured COVID. So it's like, this is the kind of thing where support for just American tough guy, faux macho belligerents like W. Bush kind of posture, people just don't believe in that anymore. That's stupid, man. It's, there's obviously a time to kick butt and not be a wimp and let your enemies, walk all over you. But America is the enemy going around picking fights with everybody all the time. And anybody can see that now. I think with the breaking of the spirit of monopoly control of the media anymore too, it's like it's just maybe a generational change where, alternative music becomes mainstream, that kind of thing, where it's just alternative media is now mainstream media. And in alternative media, you get more mileage from being a skeptic than towing the party line. You know what I mean? And the party line is always such a bunch of crap that when, independent voices are left to have at it, they tear these talking points apart. I know you see it on Twitter every day. It ain't just the algorithm. I mean, it's a lot of people coming against these narratives from so many different directions. It just can't stand up. It's death. They have all the money and power, but it's death from 100,000 cuts from out here in the country where people just don't want to go along with the war party anymore. So that is the big news. And by the way, as we're recording this, early Thursday afternoon, Trump did not bomb Iran last night. And, the announcement is, as you said, this is due to, pressure from, the, regional allies. And again, the Washington Post said his concern about what his base will think, and probably his own concern about how he'll look if something goes wrong and Americans get killed in the thing and that kind of deal. So, overall, I'm bullish on peace. No, that's over the long term. I mean, we don't have the money and the power, and Trump is still very hawkish, and he could change his mind on a lot of things.
Yeah.
But there's no good reason why we got to be doing any of this stuff, and that's got to count for something.
Hey, Scott, are you surprised? And I'm still surprised to this day. Like journalists, not to sound sanctimonious, but journalists are supposed to keep politicians and elected officials, keep them in check, keep them honest, and challenge their positions. And do you notice that if you're a journalist and you do challenge the accepted narrative, you're considered an apologist for Putin, you're considered an apologist for the Iranian government, and you're actually looked at, you're tarred and feathered as a reporter. You're considered the adversary. You're doing the propaganda work just by questioning whether or not it's a smart idea to bomb a country like Iran again.
Yeah.
Or do you get that sense too, from your standpoint? I know antiwar.com does a lot of great work. Mm-hmm. And do you ever get frustrated reading the media, seeing the posts from people in the media about these things?
Yeah, well, yes, you're right. And it's always the same thing. Oh, you love the Taliban. I mean, how much sense does that make that anyone in America just loves carrying water around for Mullah Omar and the cavemen from Kandahar? No. Oh, you love terrorism. You love Osama bin Laden. You love Saddam Hussein. You love Muammar Gaddafi. You're an Assad toady. But look at who you're talking about. You're talking about a bunch of Americans who don't have a dog in any of these fights other than wanting to weaken our own government so that we can be free, and recognizing you can't have a limited republic and a global empire at the same time. It's kind of one or the other. And so for any of these, I would just encourage people, and they feel that pressure, you know what, just straighten your back a little taller and say, no, screw you. They always lie. They always lie. And so, no, we are not obligated to go along with whatever the U.S. government says the narrative is. Why, look, everyone, here's the highest casualty count we think we can estimate without your head exploding. Buy that. No, I won't buy that. Thank you very much. And I'm in no way feeling social pressure to go along with Bari Weiss's CBS News's most extensive claims of Iranian atrocities against their protesters and whatever. Just forget that. No one can shame me into going along with what's obviously a bunch of crap. And that should be the same for everybody else. And that doesn't mean that you got to be out front saying, no way, I know for a fact the casualty count is only this. But at the very least, just hold your horses and just wait and see. Or, bring things up in their proper context. Reason Magazine this morning goes, oh my God, the numbers could be as high as 20,000. But there's no mention in there anywhere of, there's obviously a giant psyop going on here. And there's obviously a huge faction of Israeli and American backed monarchists and, MEK cultists and all kinds of kooks who have an interest in pushing these narratives. There's Iran International News Organization. Oh, that's interesting. Just heard of it. Google it. Oh, it was founded by the Saudis, the same people who publish Al Arabiya, who lie about Iran all day. And then, they've done nothing but push pro-Israeli narratives this whole time. Or then the Wall Street Journal goes, oh, look, there's this new group called Human Rights Activists in Iran. And we just believe whatever their numbers are. But who are they? They're based in Fairfax, Virginia. So, yeah, no, thank you. We could you don't have to apologize for the Ayatollah, and you don't have to believe what his government says. You also don't have to believe what Reuters says his government says. That's what I'm saying. Well, it's at least 2,000 because even their government says that. Oh, yeah? How do you know that? Well, that's just what Reuters claimed, but there's no Iranian source that's actually saying that anywhere. And I'm not saying it's definitely less than that.
No.
But again, am I or should anyone in your audience or anywhere else in this country feel some kind of obligation to go along with the party line because whatever it is they're saying about the foreign country is probably right? Nah, it's probably not. I mean, look at Muammar Gaddafi. Nobody thinks that he was a benevolent dictator. Only in comparison to everything that's happened since he was deposed when America backed Al-Qaeda to overthrow that government. Now Gaddafi looks pretty good in comparison in retrospect, right? Like that's what the one economist says to the other economist, how's your wife? And the other economist says, compared to what? Right? So yeah, the Ayatollah, oh, he's such a bad theocrat. Yeah, compared to Al-Qaeda suicide bombers, compared to Kurdish communists and Azeri saboteurs and Baluchi head choppers. And you don't know what might happen next in Iran if we had a real regime change there. The Ayatollah Khamenei, who has kept them out of war since 1989, when, of course, it was America that sponsored Saddam Hussein's attack against them, he might very reasonably be seen as a steward of basic security and independence, if not liberty, for the people of Persia compared to what comes next. And so, you know, even when people say rightly, and depends on exactly how you mean this, that like, look, it's up to the Iranian people to decide, not us. That's true. That still only goes so far. Which Iranian people to decide what and by how bare of a majority? And you know what I mean? Like, in our system, we can't have a constitutional convention unless 3/4 of the states agree to have one. Otherwise, piss off. Or maybe it's 2/3. I think it's 3/4 of the states have to agree. That's not, oh, it's up to the people to decide by some bare majority whether we're going to overthrow the constitutional, so-called constitutional regime in Washington or not. That can only happen if the 50 states, or if, you know, whatever, 35 of the 50 states or whatever the number is, 37 or whatever, agree to do it, to come together and rewrite the national government's charter. So, and then again, if we do that, and this has been, as you may know, this has been a huge controversy in America for many years of whether we should have a constitutional convention or not. And it's, there are different factions on the right and the left who have pushed it and who have vociferously opposed such a proposal over the years. And there have been times where we're just a few state votes short of actually having one.
There's a new book out. I'm forgetting the book's name. There's a new book out about the Constitution and the amendments. It's by a New Yorker, I think Lepore. Joe Lepore just wrote a book about the Constitution and amendments. And it's very interesting.
Yeah, because see, we stopped amending it is the thing.
Yeah,
and we just let them amend it by fiat and legislation and executive order and whatever. Now, the danger of a constitutional convention, of course, is that everybody now is more status than the founders then. So the new constitution will be worse, right? The Bill of Rights will have fewer protections in it. And overall, it'll be much more socialism and much more government control of the economy and much more just horrible everything. That's, to me, is my worry. We have a hard enough time enforcing the constitutional limits that we have now. And I would just think there are others who say, well, what the hell? If the current constitution is a dead letter, then we might as well like try to do a thing. Anyway, I lean hard against it, but I guess I'm willing to listen to arguments. But back to Iran. Like, what American is to say what the process should be in Persia for how they decide what their government should be? You know, for that matter, why should we believe anytime that there's a protest, even a massive protest in Iran or even in many major cities around Iran, that the goal of all the people out there is to see the Ayatollah hanged and the regime overthrown? I mean, they didn't say that. You got some people saying, oh, death to the Ayatollah or something somewhere. But just because people are protesting doesn't mean they're trying to achieve a revolution. Think how many protests we have in the United States of America where no one for a minute is considering that the local constitution that creates their state government, or that the U.S. Constitution and that the three branches and all of the court systems and everything, that all that is in question of whether they're still going to be the sovereign around here or not. No, no, no. They're just protesting for or against the war, for or against abortion, for or against this leader and the horrible thing that he did.
And then, Scott, imagine the US reaction if a country like Iran or Russia or China came out and said, we stand behind these protesters. The US better not touch them. We don't like what we're seeing happening in Minneapolis. We're watching you, US, and lay your hands off these protesters. Can you imagine the outrage from Washington if they
Yes.
made such a comment, if they interfered like that?
Yeah. Or even go to, like, say, during Occupy Wall Street, if you had the Chinese come in and funding the young leftist kids, demanding more, nationalization of the economy, or during January 6th, or like Tea Party stuff, if you had the Russians coming in and supporting the right, just think how much that would discredit them if they took a dime from a foreign power. Think of what a scandal it was, rightfully so, that the Chinese helped bankroll Bill Clinton's election in 1996. And I don't know if how well people remember this, but it was a huge scandal. But you know what they did? They did what's called the limited hangout, where they admit part of the story just to make you feel satisfied, but they omit the worst of it. So what they did was, people couldn't tell these people apart. So they hung the whole scandal around the neck of Johnny Chung and Charlie Tree. And these were a couple of fundraisers who raised money from kind of like American Chinese diaspora to donate somewhat illegally in some cases to the Clinton Gore campaign. But that wasn't where it was at, man. It was all about a guy named James Riyadi, who was a Chinese banker from Indonesia, and his right-hand man, who was a guy named John Wong. And they funneled in hundreds of thousands of dollars to the campaign. And then they had a direct quid pro quo, where John Wong was given a job in the Commerce Department licensing missile technology transfers to China, which he did. And this allowed Loral and Hughes to teach the Chinese how to launch 3-stage rockets so they could get their satellites up there. And which the authority used to belong to State and Defense to authorize those licenses. And Bill Clinton not just hired John Wong, James Riyadi's guy, but then transferred the authority from State and Defense to Commerce. So this is just huge. Anyway, I just like telling that story because I hate Bill Clinton so much, and other people don't hate him enough. But the real point being that, what the hell do you mean there were even hundreds of thousands of dollars at all in bankrolling an American politician's campaign for president, re-election for president in this case? It's absolutely outrageous. And it's absolutely outrageous that the Clintons took the money. And so, as like in your hypotheticals here, imagine any major faction in America trying to participate in politics where everybody knows that they're getting bankrolled by the Russian version of the NED here, right? Something, or the Chinese version of USAID on our shores. It'd be absolutely intolerable. And you ask yourself, how could anyone support the Ayatollah? Well, maybe because he's a symbol of their independence from our world empire, and they value that higher, right? I mean, if you, like hypothetically, if America could parachute the Shah back in there, yeah, he's going to re-legalize miniskirts and disco dancing and whatever. So like, if that's the height of freedom and how you define it, that's the most important value, then he could give more personal freedom, guarantee more personal freedom to the suburbanites of Tehran. But you could see how others in the country might value their independence as a sovereign nation outside of the diktats of the so-called international community as a higher value than, wearing skirts above your knees or whatever it is that's supposed to be the greatest blessings of American freedom, for them. And so that is the answer. Just the way Americans, here's another analogy. Let's say that it was true that the Russians had helped Donald Trump to steal the election, even though that was 100% false. And I totally debunk it in my book, Provoked. But anyway, so did a lot of other people. But if that had been true, then that still would have been our problem to solve. If Hillary Clinton had called for the Chinese to come and depose his Russian installed ass, we would all still be opposed to that. There's no way in the world that we would tolerate, even as a tit for tat. It's our problem to solve and maintain our own independence. And hell, that could be the rest of this conversation about kicking Israel and Saudi and UAE and England and everybody the hell off of our shores. You want to lobby the US government? Talk to the ambassador. And that is it. It is intolerable the amount of foreign money that gets thrown around, to kind of absorb and take up all of the momentum in the conversation, right? Over American foreign policy. It's a hell of a situation that they've gotten us into, because there's so much power at stake that, of course, all those countries are willing to do whatever they can to have as much influence as they can. One, just to protect themselves, but two, to take as much advantage as they can, if they can.
Scott, I wanted to hear your opinion on this. One of the things that struck me is that if you checked out X and you saw politicians, it seemed as though the more they support the Gaza genocide, the more they supported the starvation campaign, the more they're suddenly humanitarians when it comes to the Iranian protests. You see people like Randy Fine, who truly cheered on the suffering of innocent Palestinians in Gaza, truly celebrated it on X, coming out as a freedom fighter for the Iranians. How do you square that? How do these politicians, wouldn't you have at least the modesty to not, if you're going to come out strongly in favor of a genocide in Gaza, would you at least not have the sensibility to say, maybe I could encourage this without posting on social media to look like a complete hypocrite? Could you morally, and here's, I guess, the question, is there a moral difference in your view that you could support what happened in Gaza and support the protests in Iran? Is that such a thing? Am I missing something there?
No, look, I mean, they're just Zionists and Israeli agents to one degree or another, is all that's going on there. And yeah, I think it's hilarious. I mean, you got Ben Shapiro and Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz and Randy Fine. Oh, they're the ones who care the most about the people of Persia, because they're trying to get America to start a war against Iran and kill many, many, many more people. And they'll cry their crocodile tears and cite Bari Weiss's fraud that 20,000 people have already been killed. I mean, what a complete hoax. This is how Barack Obama did Libya. Said Gaddafi's putting down this insurgency. He's killed low levels of thousands so far, all fighters. But just wait till he gets to Benghazi. He's going to kill every last man, woman, and child in Benghazi. If we don't stop him first, we got to protect the protesters from the evil tyrant. And now this is the leadership of the Republican Party. But it's almost like, yeah, I just encourage it. The more Ben Shapiro supports this, the more everyone else can see what it is for what it is. You remember when Jonah Goldberg and all the losers at the National Review did their big Never Trump spectacular of that magazine and had all their names on the front? We're the leaders of Conservative Inc. And we say Never Trump. And as soon as that broke, I sent a tweet to Jonah Goldberg mocking him and said, how much is Trump paying you to do this? I know you know how much we all hate you. And if you're against Trump, that's probably the best reason I've ever heard to support the guy. And so, yes, Ben Shapiro, self-appointed leader of American conservatism, says, sign your boy up to go fight in Persia. You ready to swallow that? That sound right to you? I don't think they could afford a better spokesman. Randy Fine's another one. Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham. These are the leaders of the American War Party. They're all that's left. Who else could stand with these men? Not many, you know?
What kind of a role did social media play in all this? I mean, if we didn't have alternative views and alternative news and opinion on places like X, on places like YouTube, I mean, can you imagine what the public would think of a military engagement with Iran right now? It would be, I think it'd be different.
Yeah, absolutely right. Listen, there's been a lot of good, strong opposition to this policy for a very long time, the threat of war with Iran for a very long time. But it's also true that, for example, they were able to get away with just kind of pretending, they're just ignoring the non-proliferation treaty right out of existence. I mean, you could have listened through the entire W. Bush and Obama years and, whatever. Yeah. Things change after, Obama's nuclear deal at the end of his presidency. You could have listened through basically all of Bush and Obama, and they talked as though the NPT didn't exist. They talked as though Iran was not a signatory, that they did not have a safeguards agreement with the IAEA, that as far as anyone knows, the Ayatollah is going to have a nuke tomorrow. And they just lied that way for years, year after year after year. And, I used to drive for a living a lot, and I'm a AM radio junkie kind of a guy. I'm old, forgive me. But man, have I heard a lot of top of the hour AM radio news blasts. And whether ABC News or Fox News, whatever radio at the top of the hour from on your local channel. And oh my God, I couldn't tell you how many times I heard on there that Iran's about to have a nuclear bomb. And I know that just under the category of American men who drive for a living, they have been under the impression that Iran is making nukes basically this whole time, unless they personally have stopped and went, well, wait a minute, you'd think they'd have some by now or something, you know what I mean? But but they're never going to hear a contrary view. And that was the history of when we all just were stuck with TV and with radio and with the Times and the Post. And still it's true to a terrible degree that we are all essentially stuck with the Post, the Times, and the Journal and the big TV companies, because that's who the government talks to, whether, dissidents or, just who the government is, whatever they want you to think or whatever. So we are in a way still very kind of enslaved to those avenues of information. On the other hand, it seems like overall the public attitude is much more like mine, where it's like, yes, we have to suffer the Wall Street Journal. We read them, but we hate read them. And we know that they hate us and we don't trust them. And so we read between the lines and we try to figure out what's their agenda. What is it that they say that we can trust and what is it that we can't? So, but then who do you trust? Well, Dave Smith, because he doesn't lie. He maybe would screw something up sometimes, but he never gets up there to make people believe something that ain't true because somehow he figures that's better for him. That just ain't how his show is. And so he has earned the trust of all of these people. It's the same thing with Tucker Carlson, and it's the same thing with a lot of people, with Joe Rogan, with Theo Vaughn. Yeah. These comedians, like, that's part of it in a way, right? Is
even Jon Stewart, his show is pretty amazing what he does.
Yeah. Well, and definitely like back in the Bush years, he was really something to appreciate in a lot of ways then. But yeah, like being a comedian means looking for that funny comparison. And once you start doing that, once you start seeing through those eyes, boy, yeah, whatever it is compares to a lot of weird stuff. You know what I mean? The jokes kind of write themselves. And so, but anyway, I just think like out there in the world, people, maybe the information still comes to a great degree from the top down, but the interpretation, people hold their horses. I see in the comment section, people say, boy, as soon as I heard this news, I thought to myself, boy, I can't wait to hear Dave Smith's take on this. Because they know it's important, but they're not exactly sure the context. They know that he's going to have an explanation. He's going to make this fit in what you need to understand about what's going on. And so I think, and he's just one example. I pick on him because he's my buddy, but there's a lot of them like that, much more and more. And I think, a lot of guys kind of did some backsliding on Venezuela and this and that, but like, I don't know, man, you say America first 5,000 times, you kind of, it's, as they say, attitude follows behavior. You typed America first 5,000 times. You have to kind of mean it now. You can't just backslide on Venezuela and Iran. Come back to where you were 2 weeks ago, damn it. We're not doing this. We don't support this stuff. And, forget tough. How about smart? We don't need to be doing these kinds of things anymore. And I think overall, that kind of interpretation, the alternative media take on the information is, more and more the real dominant narrative. And that is to our great benefit. As I said, unfortunately, the American people don't decide, but on the margin, right? The major power factions on American foreign policy are the arms manufacturers, the generals, the bankers, the fucking Israelis, and the Saudis and the Qataris and the Brits. That's who determines American policy, not the American people. But on the margin, if people are pissed and they're stomping their foot and they're saying no, then yeah, that matters. It absolutely does.
It's so interesting because and it's easy for these outlets to kind of frame it that if you don't support these engagements, you're somehow against the U.S. military. You don't support our troops. We're sending them there, and if you don't support us sending them there and engaging in Iran, you're what are you? You're not a proud American. You don't support our troops.
Yeah,
our troops are over there fighting, and we sent them, but you don't support them. You know?
I mean, this is totally how it was, especially in Iraq War II, Afghanistan as well, but especially in Iraq War II. And like, just on the face of it, think of the Orwellian doublethink involved just on the face of that. We're sending these guys into harm's way to kill people and to get killed. And if you don't support that, you're against them. Huh? Well, all I was saying was you're not supposed to send them to kill people and get killed unless you absolutely have to. Unless you have no choice but to defend yourself from aggression. Otherwise, our Constitution presupposes peace, not a permanent state of emergency in a world empire. So, you know, it's supposed to be the absolute exception. And think of all the guys, and I'm sorry to say I told you so, but I did. We lost 7,000 American soldiers and Marines in Iraq and Afghanistan, tens of thousands more wounded, tens of thousands more suicides, and for nothing. And everyone who supported the troops bears their own share of the responsibility for that, which is admittedly a very minor share, depending on your station in life. But that was the wrong thing. The American people should have said, no, we support the troops. That's why we refuse to let Bush and Cheney use them for unnecessary wars. It wasn't the Taliban that attacked us. It was Al-Qaeda. And it wasn't Saddam Hussein that attacked us. It was Al-Qaeda. So yes, you have a writ to kill them. No, you do not have a writ to kill other people. That was the proper response. And there are plenty of people who did know that. And there are plenty of people who did say that. And they were shouted down with support the troops, which is a mindless slogan that ended up getting those troops betrayed. Right. And for all the hype about, oh, we love the troops so much. Those are the same troops that were completely abandoned and had the entire country and the government turn their back on them when they got home. You know, they weren't spit on and called baby killer and whatever, like in the stories about Vietnam, which I don't even know if that's true, but at least those are the stories about Vietnam. But homeless veterans are everywhere. Like if there's a young working age guy out there on the street, he's almost certainly a veteran of the terror wars. And they just abandon him. All these people who love the soldiers so much. Yeah, support them in war, betray them when it's over. You know, and we should all know better than that now. And, you know, when I was a kid, I'm 50. I shouldn't say that. I'm 49, dang it, for another few months here. But
I just turned 44.
I'm sorry?
I just turned 44 January 5th.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. So you might even still be a little too young for this. I'm not sure how much we overlap on this. But when I was a boy, so many of the homeless guys on the street corners were wearing their olive green Vietnam veteran army jackets. And that was who they were. And I just knew that my whole life growing up. It's like, what does it mean to be a homeless guy? These are war veterans from the terrible, terrible Vietnam War. And like, what's Vietnam? Where's Vietnam? Like, I was raised in that. The word was on people's lips still a lot. I was born in 76, right? You know, a year after the whole damn thing finally all fell down, you know? 2 years after the withdrawal of American forces there. And that's who all the homeless guys were, they were veterans who were used up and then spit out and abandoned by the government. It's one of the main reasons why I've been anti-government and anti-war my whole life, is just because I saw that up front. How much does Uncle Sam really care? How much does Big Green Army really care about their privates and their specialists? Not very damn much, okay? And I saw that. And then I remember at the time of Iraq, the idea was, this isn't going to be like that, because George Bush, he really loves the Army. He really cares about the Army. And he's giving everybody a raise. He's doing really good stuff for the Army. And the Army really is a family now, and we're going to go and do this great heroic mission and free the world from Saddam Hussein, and then come home and have a wonderful time and all of the wonderfulness. And all of that kind of belief, and then it didn't pan out. And look, there are some VA hospitals who do a great job, and there are some programs that help veterans get homes and things like this. But there are a lot of guys who are very much used up, chewed up, spit out. Go find a homeless encampment in your town and ask for a show of hands who's been to Iraq and Afghanistan. And the same thing with the suicides. People don't want to talk about this because it's all wrapped up in shame and all of these things. But like, there was a guy up the street from me who I don't really know, but I'm about 90% sure that he killed himself. He clearly was a vet of Iraq and Afghanistan, lost his legs, and he was a mean old guy. I wanted to talk, not old guy, young guy. I wanted to talk to him, but he was so standoffish and just, was kind of enemies to everybody in the neighborhood. His house is or not enemies, but just, kind of really cold to people, seemed like he was drunk a lot, and his house kind of adjacent to the mailboxes. He's always kind of mad dogging everyone there.
You lost both legs?
Yeah, lost both legs, man. And then the last time I saw him, he's like saying some drunken stuff about, I think it was his dog. I was like, his dog got out and I was returning it to him. And he's just like angrily, whatever. And then the next thing I know, all of his belongings are out on the front lawn and he's gone. And I mean, everything is out there, and then I had heard that he had died from a neighbor said or whatever, but like, I'm pretty sure that he's just one of those, man, used up, spit out, all alone. And man, if you go back and think about the hype of just like, it's, I don't know what it would take to encapsulate it, the lightning in the bottle of whatever, or the hype of the era of 2002 and 2003 and how badly we have to do Iraq. And after that, 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, why we have to stay. We can't leave now. We can't cut and run now. We're fighting the terrorists, and all of the pressure, all of the hype to make that thing so important, and the demand on the American public that anytime you see a soldier, that soldier is a hero, as though he personally like saved women from the World Trade Center or whatever. And you have to tell him that, like, this is more important than any part of any other aspect of our civic or other religions, is thank a soldier today. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. All this, essentially, you get it? It's begging the question, right? It's like, what color is the Corvette we're going to put in your driveway this afternoon there, boss? You want the red one or you want the yellow one? They're arguing past the sale. They're getting you to skip the part where was any of this justified at all or not. And it was just a guilt trip is all it was. It's just a psyop. And it's completely inane. And the thing is I quite sincerely respect American whatever men and women of all stripes, and including those who join the army, especially enlisted people. But there are a lot of good people who are officers and then whatever later see the light too. I tend to look at it more like the enlisted are the people and the officers are the government, but like whatever, like I get it. As far as even the officers go, and almost all these people mean well. And unlike regular civilian government employees, military government employees tend to really take their oath to the Constitution dead seriously and sincerely, because they're putting their life on the line, or at least other guys are getting killed for it or risking their lives over it and whatever. So it's much more meaningful. And they take that stuff seriously. So, and they know, like any veterans who've read my books and whatever, they know I don't pander to them, but I wrote the book just with pure sincerity, essentially, about what these wars were about. And so many veterans have read those books and heard my shows and whatever, and they take it as a favor to them. I might as well have written those books for them, because I'm not like disdaining them and cursing them for what they did and that kind of thing. I'm telling the truth about a lot of what happened over there, but I'm explaining to them the context in which they were used, in the context in which they were denied, right? So like, if you served in Iraq between 04 and 06 in this and that region, like, what difference did it make? Whose side were you on? Why were you even there in the first place? And what did it all result in? You might not know the answer to any of those questions. And so, none of what I'm saying here should be taken as disrespect to the troops. I get nothing but respect from them, because they can tell how I feel about them too. I feel like they got completely screwed. They to me are all that homeless Vietnam veteran on the side of the road, used up and abandoned by the US government, and including, no matter how gung-ho they were at the time, I assume they just had no idea what they were doing or who they were really shooting at and that kind of thing. And that's for later anyway, a lot of the time. I know we were all raised on this stuff. where your job as a soldier is to follow orders especially because this is not some hereditary monarchy. This is America, the world's oldest constitutional republic, where the adults talk things over under their First Amendment free speech and decide and choose the best leaders to make the best decisions, the best they know how to do. And so if you're in the army, you can trust them to use you only as you should be used to protect the lives and the property and the liberty of the American people. That's what you took your oath to. That's what you assume that is the job you're volunteering for and that they would send you on. And so the whole thing is just a giant betrayal. I mean, the empire itself is a betrayal of the entire society as well as the fighting men that they send off to do these things. Which is why they have to lie to us from morning till night, because otherwise we just wouldn't go along with this stuff anymore, which already fewer and fewer of us are willing to.
I want to get back to Iran and Israel. I had a quick question, Scott, because so much of what's on, or at least should be on Netanyahu's mind, are the young Americans and how they view Israel and the U.S. relationship with Israel. So my question to you is, if it's seen as though Israel played a role in getting the U.S. involved in a war with Iran, you mentioned the Quinnipiac poll that Massey shared that showed 70% of Americans are opposed to an engagement in Iran. Doesn't Israel risk another example of why Americans would be suspicious of that relationship? Why is Israel so, why are they not taking it a little bit slower? Do they feel that this is the time to strike now that you have Trump in the White House, and this will be the best opportunity we have to,
Yes.
They said, decapitate the snake, Iran.
Yeah, I agree.
And they're risking an entire generation of Americans that see this as another, and if Americans start dying at bases in the Middle East and there's a big war.
I think, you know what, speaking of Dave Smith, I think he pointed out that in fact, they know they've already lost the American public, and especially the younger generation. They've got some baby boomers now. And so therefore, that's why to go for it now, before it's too late, before they finally lose what's left of American support. And, you know, they've made major headway in killing the leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, their charismatic and very influential leader. Whoever's replaced him, I don't know who, but he's not as magnetic a personality as far as, you know, leadership abilities over those people. So, and because of the airstrikes and the pager attack and whatever, Hezbollah's been severely weakened. The Assad regime in Syria has been finally overthrown in the end of 2024 by bin Ladenite forces there. So that is in favor of Israel because it breaks that Shiite arc of power, as they called it, from Tehran through Baghdad, George W. Bush, through Damascus and on to Beirut. So there's two good scores for the Israelis there. And then their third major score was the severe setback to Iran's nuclear program. And I think that this is, you framed it right. The calculation is essentially one of time preference, right? Do we go ahead and go for broke now? Use and abuse the American people to the nth degree one last good time so that we get what we want. We get rid of the Ayatollahs in Tehran and put an end to that part of the threat to Israel for the long term. And then in that case, not really have to worry whether they have American support anymore because they're armed up well enough and their enemies are weak and divided enough. They've succeeded in making friends with most of the close-in Arab states, at least for the time being. And so is it worth it or is it not? I've long been fascinated by Israel, the Israeli government's short time preference, right? As the economists would call it, where they're going to get away with bloody murder now. And then if this causes, like you're saying, just overall resentment, a lack of support for them in the sentiment of, for example, the American people or all that, or American politicians even, that their attitude seems to always be, we'll just worry about that later. We're going to get away with what we're going to get away with. You know, like this is the iron law of the universe. It's always easier to ask forgiveness than permission. Okay, but maybe not always, right? Like maybe you're going to find that, no, you're not forgiven. We're really pissed off this time. And for me, I've been like this since Iraq War II, because Israel played such a huge role in lying us into that war. And I never really had taken the time to learn very much about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, basically because I bought the propaganda that, well, it's just a fight over God gave this land to us. No, God gave this land to us and whatever. And then, so I don't think anybody really has a legitimate claim there. So I just don't care enough to really learn all the ins and outs of it and whatever. And then once they helped lie this country into Iraq War II, and the neoconservatives were just the Likud in America, basically the vanguard of the Israel lobby in the United States, and the role that they played in lying us into that war, well, then I was motivated to learn much more about who's occupying who over there. And come to find out, no, the Palestinians have plain old natural rights, just like everybody else in the world. It's the Israeli Zionist Jews from Eastern Europe who claim to have this supernatural property right, according to their religion, that cancels out the property rights, the plain old exact, just natural human property rights that people who live there already possessed. And so it's not God gave us this land. No, God gave us this land. It's my great grandfather gave me this land. No, God gave us this land, as like the pretended trump card over natural law and natural rights, which is completely absurd and preposterous as any pile of crap ever shoveled, if you ask me. So yeah, and there are people who are going to never, I'm telling you, man, I'm one of them too. There are people who only just got started in the last couple of years who never knew. But, you know, as I say this, I'm sure it occurs to you, the images you have in your mind of all of the dead children, women and children that they killed in Gaza over the last couple of years. I mean, there's images I'll never forget of guys carrying their dead children's body parts in plastic bags, of the wailing of the women and the gnashing of their teeth over their dead grandbabies, the footage of collapsed buildings where you can hear the babies, the toddlers stuck in the void spaces in there crying for help, buried alive, who are going to die over the next 5 days of dehydration because nobody's coming. There's no way to get them out of there. They're buried alive with their leg pinned or whatever in some void space in there. They're just going to suffocate in the dark alone.
And nobody cares. No international reaction.
No international reaction, but Americans who will never forget it. And Americans who will now understand that Israel is the worst thing about the United States by far. There's nothing that compares to it. And it may be the worst thing about the world. It's the most barbarian society, the most criminal, barbarous government on the planet. They make the Chicoms look like whatever, I don't know, whoever's not that bad. And the Chicoms are, but there is no tyranny like the Israeli tyranny over the Palestinian people on this planet today. It's just absolutely disgusting. And if this kind of thing counts, and I think it does, this goes down in history books forever, that America's aided and abetted this since the end of World War II. There's just absolute crime against the people of Palestine and ongoing. They're just utter enslavement under circumstances that are akin to Soviet communism or Maoist communism. Just the most abject human slavery. It is, you know, almost beyond comprehension. It's certainly beyond forgiveness or beyond toleration. And it's coming to a head. And you know what? The Iran war might just be the last straw. You know, it could be that they already pulled their last straw there, or that's the wrong metaphor, but it could be they already, you know, we're already past that point, and that's part of what Netanyahu is afraid of too. Not just defending Tel Aviv. Well, I don't know if he gives a damn. But he should. That one good last American, you know, war on behalf of Israel might be the end of that state, because it'd certainly be the end. It certainly could be the end of American support for them overall. I joked before. I meant it at the time. I don't know if it was a joke. I says right before Trump was inaugurated a year ago that Trump may be the most Zionist president in the history of the United States of America, but he might be the last one. And it might not be the case that presidents can get elected kowtow into Israel anymore. The balance may very well have shifted. Money's money, but at the end of the day, you got to win these votes. And Florida's Florida, but the rest of the country still the rest of the country.
J.D. Vance might be seeing that. You see him kind of taking a little bit more of a sheepish support of Israel recently, to a degree. You know,
he's leaking. At least he's telling his friends to tell the papers that he's the most reluctant guy on the cabinet right now, for what that's worth.
My last question, Scott, I know we don't have very much time. I appreciate you taking some time to sit with me. We have a few minutes left. if you're a country and you know that the U.S. is not your ally, not that really, what country would say U.S. is fully their ally after the whole thing that's going on with Greenland right now. But if you're a country, aren't you interested in getting as many weapons as possible, upgrading your weapon stock as much as possible after seeing what happened in Venezuela, after seeing the bullying of Iran right now? Why do every country, I mean, talk about politics through the end of a gun barrel.
Mhm.
I think Mao said that. Every country, wouldn't you, if you were a leader of a country that didn't kowtow to the United States, would you not be upgrading your military as fast as possible?
Yep. Look, I have that's one just kind of long paragraph in my book Provoked, where I just run down how George W. Bush tore up his father and Richard Nixon's treaties with the Russians and tore up Bill Clinton's treaty with the North Koreans. Barack Obama came in and he tore up W. Bush's, I shouldn't say treaties. These aren't all treaties. Let's say agreements. Some of them are treaties. Some of them are agreements. W. Bush came in and tore up Bill Clinton's agreement with North Korea to keep them in the non-proliferation treaty.
What's the difference, Scott, between an agreement and a treaty, just from a legal standpoint?
Okay, so we have like a full arms control treaty, like SALT or START 1, START 2, New START, these arms control treaties with the Russians or with the Soviet Union. These are the highest level agreements that nation states can make, ratified by our Senate and by their parliament and that kind of thing, and the highest level of officialdom. Whereas, like, for example, Bill Clinton made an agreement with North Korea called the Agreed Framework, where he said, just between you and me, it's not ratified by the Senate, it's not a full treaty, but we promise to sell you light water reactors and fuel oil and give you some welfare money if you promise to stay within the non-proliferation treaty, the treaty. And they said, okay, fine. And then W. Bush came in and tore that up. And there's more to it than that, but essentially kicked them right out of the treaty. And then what they do? They made nuclear weapons, and nobody's messed with them since, right? Now, Barack Obama comes in. W. Bush had made a treaty with Muammar Gaddafi. Give up your nuclear technology, which he didn't have much. It was in crates, really. He didn't have a program, but give up your nuclear tech, and I'll bring you in from the cold, and we'll be friends again. Gaddafi went for it. 7 years later, Barack Obama hired al-Qaeda mercenaries to murder him to death and overthrow his government, right? So now Saddam Hussein, well, sorry to keep on that same track. Barack Obama makes a deal with Iran on their nuclear program. They already were part of the NPT, but he said, let's expand your safeguards agreement to expand your inspections and roll back your nuclear program some and this kind of thing. They went for it. Then Donald Trump came in and he tore that up. That was, again, not quite a treaty, the JCPOA, but it was an agreement made with Iran and with the rest of the UN Security Council powers and all of that. And so Donald Trump came in and tore that one up. And now, nobody ever had an agreement with Iran, with Iraq. They just buffaloed us right into that one. But so if you look at the axis of evil states, you have Saddam Hussein put his hands up. We just rolled right in there anyway. Gaddafi gave up his nuclear tech. We murdered him. Assad gave up his chemical weapons, murdered him or overthrew him. And Iran said, hands up. We have civilian nuclear tech, but we're not making bombs, but we got a latent nuclear capability. Don't shoot. And we went ahead and bombed the crap out of their latent nuclear program. So the objective lesson for any nation in the world who's even worried about ever coming, into America's crosshairs by hook or by crook, you're sitting on some oil or some minerals we might want, get yourself some A-bombs. The Kim dynasty is still in charge in North Korea. The Ayatollah's counting his days, his hours. Saddam is dead. Gaddafi's dead. Assad lives in the suburbs of Moscow in exile. And so, yes, weapons of mass destruction guarantee your independence. Ask Putin. Ask Chairman Xi. They'll tell you the same thing. Why do American sock puppets not rule Moscow and Beijing? Because they have hydrogen bombs and they'll use them, and we know it. That's why. And so, and again, same thing for North Korea. They don't have H-bombs, although they have tested boosted atom bombs that are sort of like a half-assed hydrogen bomb. It's like a boost with tritium, which is, I don't know exactly like where's the line between a boosted A bomb and a full-fledged H bomb, but they've at least toyed with that stuff. And they claim to have tested a hypersonic missile, the North Koreans. And so, which means cannot be shot down by American defensive systems. So that's why North Korea maintains its independence. That's why they're not even under threat compared to any of the rest of the axis of evil states, which you'll note were all just enemies of Benjamin Netanyahu and Ariel Sharon, was the axis of evil. And how, in fact, the only reason they threw in North Korea in that original speech was just because if they had made it Syria, you would have went, wait a minute. This speech was written in Tel Aviv, not Washington. What the hell is going on here? They threw in North Korea just to be like, oh, I guess this is about weapons and delivery systems instead of Ariel Sharon's national security strategy.
Well, Scott, on that note, it's not a pleasant note, but it's always great to see you, Scott. I appreciate you taking some time to speak with the Trends Journal. Scott Horton, he's the director of the Scott Horton Academy in Foreign Policy and Freedom, editorial director at antiwar.com. We're going to have a link for all these things below, so I encourage everyone to check that out. Scott, thank you for joining me.
Absolutely.